The desert and jungle temples have had it too good for too long. I'm adding more biome temples using jigsaw structures and filling them with custom items and mechanics so I can bring them to life as they join the pantheon of Minecraft structures. For my last temple, I started with the exterior design first and then worked inwards to fill it with custom features and decorations that would fit it. This time though, I have an idea already of the mechanics that I want to implement, but I will need an understanding of the available space that I need to fill with those mechanics in order to then build outward. I do know that I want my next temple to appear in the Badlands biome, so that'll include things like the wooded Badlands, as well as the regular Badlands, the eroded Badlands. Is that all of them? I think so. Which means I may need to be a little bit cautious about not only the kinds of blocks that I'm building with, but also the general size and shape of the structure, because these biomes in particular can be quite hilly. Jigsaw structures have some tricks to help kind of blend in and meld with uneven terrain, but this is pretty hilly, so while I might not be able to make it look perfect, I should at least be considerate of it when I'm designing the structure. I do know that I want it to probably be made out of sandstone. Let me find a nice little flat area here. And it'll probably have some kind of a large central interior chamber, something like an antechamber or a foyer or something, just sort of a central wide open location that'll serve as kind of your center point as you explore the structure, very similar to the chapel room from the Plains Temple. And then in theory, out from there, I'm going to want a few smaller rooms that'll kind of branch out of it like so, and an entryway into the antechamber like this. The general shape of this is probably getting pretty similar to something like an ocean monument, which is good. I think it means that we're on a good track as far as aesthetics that will fit in Minecraft because we have a basis for it already. But obviously I don't want to just completely mimic the ocean monument, so we'll find some ways to change it up and make it its own unique identity. To start with though, since I think the bulk of the player experience is going to be in this antechamber here, I want to build this up and get a rough idea of how much space I'm going to need, or at least be able to use, as we then start to plan out how we're going to enter these rooms and how I'm going to implement the mechanics that I have in mind. So let's head into a flat world and start putting some pen to paper, or blocks to grass, I guess. So we're definitely starting with a much less grand foundation than we did for the Plains Temple, where, like I mentioned, I built the original structure, the base structure first, and then broke it into pieces to figure out how I wanted them to fit together. Here, we're needing to build the pieces first and then expanding outward to then figure out how the final structure is going to look. But we can fly on in here to take a look at what is going to be, like I mentioned, that central antechamber, or at least most of it. This isn't necessarily where the player is going to be spending most of their time in the Badlands Temple, but it is going to be that kind of central touchstone location that will then inform how they explore the rest of the rooms, or at least the other 3 rooms that will make up the temple. Here in the middle, you'll notice that I've placed a vault on a nice little pedestal with a little bit of a sign behind me that I'll get to in a second. Right now, this vault is just one of the vanilla trial chamber vaults, but I'm definitely going to change that. Not only change what loot it drops, but also what item it accepts as a key, so that mainly I can just kind of piggyback off the base behavior of vaults and make the core loot, the valuable loot that you get from this temple, once per player, without needing to code in that behavior myself with ugly functions and data commands and such. So while this will technically be replaced, it'll still behave as you would expect for a vault. The sign is here to clue in part, how to interact with the vault, and also the general idea and mechanic of the Badlands Temple that I hope to be able to implement in a smooth way. It says, "Whosoever desecrates this tomb shall never know my treasure." If any of you have played the New in Town Dimensions data pack, this wording might sound familiar. I used it for the Pharaoh's tomb, mostly to help indicate that you weren't supposed to break into the tomb in order to discover how to use it and what was inside of it. You're meant to interact with it a different way. But here, it does serve as a proper warning that things will happen, bad things might happen, if you try to desecrate this tomb, if you break the tomb. That is the general idea for the main mechanic that I want to incorporate for how players interact with this temple. I don't know exactly how I'm going to implement it yet. There's certainly performance considerations that need to be taken into account, as well as the fun and the gameplay aspect. Obviously, Minecraft is a block game, a building game, and chiefly a mining game, and so taking away players' ability to mine blocks, to break blocks, would not be ideal. That would be pretty antithetical to Minecraft, but I do want to discourage it as part of how players interact with and explore this structure. So exactly how we'll implement that, I'm not sure yet, but it is something to keep in mind as we explore how we build the rest of it. Now, I did say this was most of the antechamber structure. Obviously, we are missing 3 of the walls here. We've got this wall that serves as the entrance into the antechamber, and it will have a jigsaw block to connect to a more decorated exterior. But we also have these pieces over here that I'm calling slices, though they don't necessarily behave in the same way that slices did in something like my bone dungeon video. We have 2 of these wide slices and 1 slice that is a little bit shorter. The 2 wide slices are going to be used for either side of the antechamber, though it isn't 1 slice per side. They are 2 different variants of the same slice, and each side will randomly determine which slice to use. The difference between the 2 slices is that one of these will always generate as a dead end of sorts. It'll just be a blank wall, and then the other slice will always generate a doorway into the room connecting to the antechamber once we build those rooms. There's only 1 slice variant for the back wall here because I always want that to generate a doorway into a room. Randomness and variety is an important aspect of jigsaw structures to me personally. It's something I always try to implement in both small and large capacities, but there are some elements that I do want to be consistent for the gameplay experience, and this is one of them. I always want to make sure that at least one of these walls, and in fact always the back wall, is going to be that doorway into an adjoining room. This right here is the doorway in question, and as you can see, it's just a simple archway with a jigsaw block. Now, how this connects into these slices is pretty interesting. We have these jigsaw blocks in the antechamber right here that then generate one of these larger slices connecting to this jigsaw block right here. The difference between these variants is both in what the exterior jigsaw block will generate outside to extend out of the structure, whether it's a room or kind of an empty box, but also this jigsaw block right here, which will vary and determine whether it places that doorway structure or one of these wall carvings into the gap where that jigsaw block is pointing. We have 3 variants of wall carvings, and I tried to take a little bit of Egyptian inspiration from these. Egypt doesn't really have a strong connection to the Badlands in Minecraft in specific, but it is pretty heavily influencing the design of the sandstone and red sandstone block palettes, and so I think it's what's going to make the most sense with the blocks that I would like to build with. So this wall carving right here is shaped roughly like an ankh, and this one back here is meant to sort of mimic like a tapestry of some sort, like a scroll of papyrus. It's a pretty loose motif, I will give you that, but that's the general idea. They are 2 blocks thick so that I can have some solid blocks on the backside without changing how these wall blocks look. So if I were to place blocks here, it would fill in this middle section right here, and I don't want that. So I've just made sure that there's always going to be air on that side. Obviously, that means that it's going to let light through. It's going to make it 1 block thick instead of 2 right there if somebody wanted to break the wall. But I think that's important for the aesthetic element, and hopefully something I can still discourage as far as the breaking with the mechanic that I used to implement alongside this vault. Now, before I go and test how all these pieces fit together, I would like to, again, just get a better idea of how this space is going to be filled. Obviously, right now, even if we were to add the slices on top of here, it would still pretty much be an empty box, and I would like a little bit more to test. For starters, I think I'm going to place a few jigsaw blocks like this, kind of around the central pedestal here, and maybe in a few other strategic locations around the room where I can generate some like randomized decorated pots that'll have some random rotation and various kinds of decorations of sherds on the sides of them, and they can be filled with different kinds of loot just to help kind of populate and make this temple feel like it is, if not lived in, then cared for. We'll also probably have a few jigsaw blocks maybe here and perhaps here where some sand piles can generate so that we can have some areas where there can be some archaeology implemented. And then I'd also really like for some pillars to kind of hold up this upper area, this upper section of the ceiling. And if I can place them in just the right spot in these corners here, I think that'll end up looking the best. We have these pillars here already on the walls, but I think that'll help tie the exterior of the room in with the interior of the room and help break up what would otherwise be a lot of empty floor space, so there can be some spaces to like hide from mobs and such. I'm not placing these where they're actually going to go. I think that's correct. There we go. That's, I think, my general idea, but the exact locations of these jigsaw blocks is probably going to vary based on what those actual decorations end up looking like. So let's get those put together and then we can see how it all generates together. Let's take a look at the new decorations that I've added before we explore how they've actually manifested as jigsaw blocks inside of that antechamber room. First off, we have the pillars, for which I've made 3 variants at different stages of ruin and decay. These are 4x4, which was a very interesting design challenge for me, but I think is going to suit the space very well. If I made the pillar part 3x3 and therefore had them fill a 5x5 footprint, not only would that be probably too big, but it also would be like awkwardly thick for the space that we have, whereas a 1x1 pillar design I think would have looked very strange and twig-like. So 2x2 ends up creating the right idea, I hope, once we get it implemented in the space. But it was an interesting design challenge, especially as far as the placement of the jigsaw blocks, which I'll get to in a minute. I've placed a few more of these vertical jigsaw blocks in the corners here that'll each have a chance to generate some of those decorated pots or smaller decor features that I'll get to in a second, but they vary based on which state of ruin the pillar that gets selected will be, and of course each of these will have a random chance to be selected for each of the corners inside the room. We also have these piles of sand back here that I'm going to apply a processor to randomly replace some assortment of the sand with suspicious sand and some assortment of it, a larger assortment I'm sure, with red sand. Something that I implemented in the Plains Temple and that I want to continue through at least as many of the temples as I can make it work for is an element of archaeology carried over from the trail ruins, because I think that's just a fun idea and something that is implemented in the vanilla desert temple, though not the jungle temple. So the hope is it helps kind of tie them together and make them feel a little bit more vanilla-like. Unfortunately, there isn't a suspicious red sand block as much as I wish there was. So unfortunately, I am stuck with using suspicious sand and incorporating some regular sand blocks as well so it doesn't feel too out of place. In fact, I'm probably going to implement in the processor as well to replace some of the red sand that makes up the floor of these rooms with sand, as well as suspicious sand, again, to keep incorporating archaeology, and also so that where we do have sand and suspicious sand, it doesn't feel like super duper out of place. I realize I've been standing far back from the sand pile, so here's where you can get a little bit of a better look at them. We've got 2 different variants, one that is flat, that's just going to kind of fill in part of the floor, and one that is a little bit more of a pile that'll be kind of sitting on top of the floor. The reason I've been standing so far back is because in addition to the 3 variants of pots that we have, undecorated, decorated with a pickaxe, and decorated with a map here, I also have this new custom block that I've created called a sconce. This is going to serve the same general purpose as the focus mirror did back in the Plains Temple. This is a block that the player is going to be able to craft whether they've visited the Badlands Temple or not, and it'll be used to interact with some element of the structure. Think of it kind of like an archaeology brush. When you visit a trail ruin, you aren't really able to fully experience it without bringing a specific item to it, and the same is true for the Badlands Temple. Sconces can be crafted in a crafting table with 3 iron ingots, 1 torch, and 2 of any type of wood, and you unlock this recipe whenever you gather any type of wood or an iron ingot. Note that specifically this does, except for the block of bamboo, require the all-sided wood bark block, not just any old log. When you get a sconce and place it down, you might get a short flash of a glowstone block because that's how I'm handling the custom block placement, but then you'll end up with this nice placeable sconce that has some cool orange fire inside of it. You can left click to break it, and if you're in survival mode, then it'll drop as an item instantly for you to place back down. Like I said, the sconce is going to serve as the item that players are expected to have in order to fully engage with the Badlands Temple's mechanics. The way that it does this is by way of that orange fire, or put a better way, colored fire. Using raw copper, raw iron, prismarine crystals, a clay ball, or redstone dust on a sconce will change the color of its fire and consume that item. My plan is to implement some kind of puzzle, or at least like secret doors or something, somewhere where you have to place a sconce in front of something and then change it to the correct color, however that's determined, using some of these items, consuming some of these items, in order to unlock that door or solve the puzzle in some way. Initially, my goal was as best as I could to make the colors sort of match how you would actually get these colors of fire. So for raw copper and raw iron, I would say that they're generally pretty close. When you get a chemical reaction of copper and fire, it does tend to turn a little bit of a green. Similar with getting some iron in there, it will turn it yellow. But for getting things like blue or purple or red, we don't really have the minerals, the elements in Minecraft, or things that are super close to them, at least that would make sense and have a similar kind of rarity and aesthetic to copper and iron to be able to produce these colors. So I kind of had to wing it a little bit with things like these, fantasy elements like prismarine crystals and redstone dust. Any chemists or geologists out there, please forgive me. Now, when you break the sconce, it isn't going to drop as the color of sconce that it was, so every time you place it, it'll restart at that orange fire in case you wanted that orange color, since you can't get that through any other means, and then you can use the item on it to get whatever desired color that you want. But of course, it does consume that item if you're in survival. The sconce back here is going to have a rare chance to generate from these vertically upward facing jigsaw blocks that you find from these pillars and inside the antechamber proper, which we can now go take a look at, but they're going to have a pretty small chance. Mostly my idea is players will be able to gather the resources not only to craft a sconce, but also to change its colors by engaging with the Badlands temple. It'll be found as loot in the pots, the ingredients for it, as well as these chemistry items, as well as able to be found via archaeology in the Badlands temple. Going back to the structure itself and the jigsaw blocks, we can take a look at how everything kind of shook out, and most everything pretty much landed where I expected it to. I didn't place quite as many of the small decor jigsaw blocks around the sides because some of them ended up inside these slices, like this one right here. But you can see I have a jigsaw block here and here, one that is able to place the sand pile that sits on top of the ground, and one that's able to place the sand pile that fills in the ground. So the main thing that ended up kind of shifting as the build kind of came into fruition is how the jigsaw blocks for the pillars ended up getting placed. You might be a little hard to tell, but each of these jigsaw blocks is rotated a little bit differently on 90-degree angles from each other, and I've set them all to be aligned. Which means that when any one of these jigsaw blocks generates its child structure, it's not going to rotate it. It's going to try and connect it exactly by the same rotation. Unlike something like these small decor jigsaw blocks that are set to rollable rather than aligned, so that the pot that they place does get some random rotation applied. And the reason I've done this is because those pillars ended up being 2x2 or 4x4 with their footprint. I wanted them to be able to have some random rotation, but there wouldn't be a way to do that with just one jigsaw block connecting them without making them potentially offset with the ceiling in ways that would not be consistent, that wouldn't be symmetrical. So the solution was to take advantage of jigsaw block behavior, and specifically bounding box behavior. When this structure gets generated, one of these jigsaw blocks is going to randomly get selected to attempt to generate its structure first. It doesn't really matter which one, because whichever it is going to then generate one of those pillars at random, but without a random rotation, exactly aligned to that particular jigsaw block. Because it's random which jigsaw block gets selected first, it'll be random which rotation that structure gets placed with. And then, when one of these other jigsaw blocks gets randomly selected to try to generate next, it's going to see, oh, there's already something in this space where I'm attempting to generate a structure. The structure that I would generate is going to intersect that bounding box, which means I can't place that structure. I am going to fail, and each of those successive jigsaw blocks is going to see the same thing. This was really exciting to figure out, not only because it was another opportunity to take advantage of bounding box manipulation, which is something I've gotten pretty good at since the Ominous Mansions video, but also because it was a really creative solution to the problem of trying to rotate a structure that has an even length and width around what I wanted to be a singular origin point, an origin point that necessarily cannot be on a single block coordinate. That's the idea anyway. We'll need to actually go into a world and test all this generation to see if it really turned out that way. Alright, well here we've got our pretty ugly box, I would say. We definitely need to eventually get around to decorating the outside, but we still have some more space to fill to understand how we can actually decorate it. The important part, at least for now, is that happened to generate in a pretty nice little saddle of this large mountainous region, which is pretty nice, but even then we can see a little bit of that bearding down here to help it blend in some with the terrain. It's quite possible that this was a little bit of a steeper kind of basin or runoff right here that it filled in some to be able to support the structure. So that does bode well that this will be able to look reasonably fine even in these very hilly areas. Let's go ahead and come into what I suspect is the entrance, yes, and we can see how some of these features are getting placed in here, or jigsaw pieces rather. So we of course have our placeholder vault and the sign here. All of that should be generating pretty consistently. We do have what appears to be a lot of decorated pots around here, so I might turn up the chance for an empty pool element in that particular template pool, just to kind of break them up a little bit. I don't want every single spot where a pot could generate for a pot to generate. I placed them so frequently, specifically so that there was some variety and randomness in where they ended up happening to generate in a particular Badlands temple, and that isn't necessarily evident here right now. We did get a sconce here, which is nice. So even with all these decorated pots here, probably even especially with them, we do have a chance to get, so far, at least one sconce per Badlands temple to be able to generate in the room, so players don't necessarily have to craft them. We can see for the two sides, they ended up selecting the dead end slice, so we got, in this case, the same decoration on each side, and then for the back, we got the intended doorway that would lead into an adjoining room. If we actually come down to the ground and get the intended player experience, we of course met with this sand pile first that is blocking our way and our view of the sign, very important sign to indicate how players will engage with the structure. But then we can start to walk around and see, okay, we've got a sconce over here. The pillars, I think, add a lot, the finished pillars in particular. And then in theory, we'll have a nice room over here and a little less natural lighting once we add a roof onto this bad boy. I did already add the loot tables into the suspicious sand so we can see what we get out of a few of them. We got a raw iron out of this one, so again, this would be one of the items to sort of help clue the player in on how they can interact with the sconces. The hope is that the sconces having a chance to generate with a different color of fire will help with that as well, so we can go ahead and use that on there to change it to yellow, but if the player breaks it, they'll notice that it isn't that color anymore, and hopefully that'll be an indicator that they could change the color. The way I'm implementing the colored fire is actually pretty neat, I think. Unlike the focus mirrors from the Plains Temple that have a different model or a different composite model for each of the different carpet colors, the sconce is using the same model for all of them, but the color of the fire can be tinted using custom model data. And then whenever you use one of those items on the sconce, on the interaction entity, then it uses an item modifier on its passenger item display to change what that custom model data is, so that it changes the color of the fire. This reduces the number of different texture files, the number of different model files, and frankly just makes it really easy and convenient to not only change the color of the fire, but add more in the future if I want to. Also on the topic of sconces, these aren't only going to be used for interacting with the Badlands Temple, and also not only are they for decoration. Though it is a small mechanic, I've made it so that sconces can reveal the locations of entities that are invisible. You'll see that as I've drank this invisibility potion, I'm now emitting not only the regular potion particles, but also some black shadow particles that are getting cast on the ground because I'm near the sconce. This makes sconces not only a fun decoration for your base that might add a little bit more character than a campfire or even a torch, but also adds some utility to them if you are often up against invisible foes. There aren't really a lot of invisible mobs in vanilla Minecraft. The main hostile one that you would tend to encounter is spiders, and only if you're in hard mode. But the option still remains. Certainly if you're using another data pack that adds illusioners into the game in some capacity, then you could use sconces to help sniff out the real invisible mob and ignore the duplicates that it summons. Or of course, it's potentially useful in a server environment where players are invisible often and for some reason the particles are hidden, or maybe just you don't notice them very much. The black particles, the shadow that gets cast on the ground, is a lot easier to spot. Now I want to get some start on decorating this giant ugly box, but I also still need to expand it out a little bit more. I want to build the rooms that are going to connect to the three sides here, whether they're connected via doorway or not. And I also want to start building upon the roof, since I don't think I'm going to add any more kind of play space up here. I've left this gap open here so that we could have one more tier of the ceiling as part of the roof piece that'll be placed on top of this, but I also need to build those rooms to get an idea of how big the roof pieces that need to be on top of those will be. So let's head back to the flat world and see how those kind of shape up and inform one another. If you're enjoying the video, please remember to like and subscribe for more custom structures, world gen, and data pack content. To learn to get into custom structures yourself, check the link in the description for my very thorough written guide that I've made for Data Pack Hub, where I am an official helper. And if you'd like to support the channel and help playtest the Badlands Temple as well as the previous Plains Temple, please consider joining my Patreon. I plan to release this Temple's data pack publicly once I have more biomes covered, but for now, I really appreciate the support and playtesting of my patrons. We'll start off with the roof pieces that I've made so far. We'll probably add a few more varieties later, but I want to make sure that they kind of fit with the other pieces that we have and the new ones I've put together. I'm probably going to take some inspiration from a variety of sources, especially when it comes to determining how I want to decorate the exterior of the temple in particular. And so for these roofs, I took primary inspiration, loose inspiration anyway, from the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and images of it. This larger piece right here is what's going to sit on top of the antechamber, including the slices once they're placed on the sides here, and is kind of just a big old box that has some little gardens inside of it. We've got some archways that go into the gardens here, and then this section down here is going to connect to the side piece over there. We have a few additional gardens here on top, and a small little decorative pillar that isn't necessarily supporting anything, it's just there to kind of look nice. This little space here is down in the very middle bottom of this roof piece, and the jigsaw block that's right in front of me here is going to connect to a jigsaw block that is in the top of the antechamber room. So the hole in the roof of the antechamber will get filled in by this hole right here, this kind of gap, to create the lofted ceiling that I'm going for. Now, I don't have any specific plans for these roof pieces to be part of the intended play space. I kind of want to prioritize players spending most of their time again in the antechamber and in the rooms adjoining it, but nevertheless, I do want these roof pieces to look nice and to be decorated. And so you'll see as we come in here, I have quite a lot of jigsaw blocks serving a variety of decorative purposes. These ones sitting on top of the grass right here are, of course, going to place more of those decorated pots and sconces, though I have reduced the frequency that those will be able to generate by the template pool. These jigsaw blocks in the ground, however, are going to be placing some world gen features to help decorate the garden, the grass floor here that we have. I don't use this mechanic of jigsaw blocks as often as, frankly, I would like to, for how cool it is and how robust it allows you to be able to decorate structures and make them feel kind of integrated with the world more, but jigsaw blocks are able to place world gen features that would normally be used to decorate a biome. So for example, all of these jigsaw blocks in here are placing what is called a feature pool element that basically has an implicit jigsaw block inside of it named Minecraft Bottom. I've named it Minecraft Top just for my, convenience, so I can remember and understand what the purpose of this jigsaw block is. But once it places that sort of pretend jigsaw block, then it'll attempt to place a few different kinds of features. I've made a feature that just places a random patch of either some short grass or dead bushes, as well as a feature that is sort of a larger oak bush to kind of fit in particular with the oak trees that we tend to see in the wooded Badlands. The side structure works much the same way, where the roof piece is going to connect directly to the antechamber via that jigsaw block right there. we have some jigsaw blocks right here that are going to generate on the sides of the central roof piece, the side piece from it, but from this jigsaw block right here. These are decorated much the same way. I've put them on a little bit of a lower tier, so you can see that jigsaw block is on the same level as this jigsaw block, which means that this is kind of going to act like a terrace as you step out from under these arches here. And then underneath that, we have some more arches that have a little bit of a covered patio type situation, though obviously not a patio, more of a garden. I have similar feature jigsaw blocks here on the terrace of these side pieces, but they are able to place some additional features as well. In addition to being able to generate that patch of short grass or dead bushes, they're also able to generate, rather than those larger oak bushes, actual oak trees, or the juniper trees that I created for my desert update for my wooded Badlands. Just to kind of help tie this structure together with the wooded Badlands, if you were to play with both this data pack and the Overrealm data pack once that gets released. This should hopefully add some nice vegetation and to a certain extent color to the roof of this structure and help make it feel not quite so much like a big red box. Of course, more exterior pieces will come along the way to decorate the outside of the rooms as well as they connect to the antechamber, but we'll need to actually see how those end up shaping out in order to determine what we're going to do there, because I don't know that I necessarily want to repeat this hanging garden motif all the way down. With that, let's go ahead and talk about the at least basic generic room designs that we have so far. This first one is probably not really going to change. This is the entrance hall that is going to connect to the front of the antechamber and ultimately serve as the entrance into the structure proper. It's a little bit smaller than some of the other rooms are. The roof is a little bit less lofty, but it does have some jigsaw blocks for decoration. We've got two over here that'll place some of those decorative wall carvings on the wall, same with over here, and a couple of jigsaw blocks that'll place those pots or sconces. I have a couple more jigsaw blocks that I've already placed in the floor in anticipation of some more decorations, but I haven't actually built those yet. I wanted to get an idea of where they would roughly go so I can understand the space available before I design them. I've done the same thing over here for these two generic room designs that are going to connect to the back and the sides of the antechamber. Now both of these, if we take a brief look in here and then fly over to the other side, are going to look almost completely identical. And in fact, they are almost completely identical. The only difference is which jigsaw block right here is going to connect to the antechamber and which is going to connect to the exterior that we've yet to build. Because I've changed a little bit as to how the doorway situation actually works with regards to these slices. Sometimes you are going to get this open doorway here, but in addition to building some shorter wall carving structures that will be able to fit in things like the entrance hall and against these walls here that aren't 2 blocks thick, I've also made some variants that are going to be used to create secret doors. You'll see that we have some ash particles here sitting on top of these dark oak wood blocks, which are meant to indicate that this is somewhere you're supposed to place something in order to do something, and that something that you're placing is of course a sconce. To see how that ends up working, how the player is going to be informed that this is the intended method of entry, and how it relates to both the antechamber and the exterior pieces that we'll build later, let's head into a test world and make sure that these rooms connect to their slices correctly, and as well that the roof pieces generate properly. Okay, yes, I would say that our giant orange box is getting a little bit more pleasantly shaped. I do think, especially from above, the gardens here for these roof pieces add quite a bit. But even coming down from below, I think the shape that they add, and especially the shape that the leaves add from these trees, helps make this feel a little bit more kind of integrated with the world. The rooms as well are helping to add a little bit of additional shape, so while we are still going to decorate the outside of these rooms, it's nice to see that this is feeling much more like an intentional structure than just kind of like a box of stuff. Let's come inside through the entrance here and see first how the entrance hall is generating here. And obviously right now it's still a little bit empty because we don't have any of those decorative pieces here yet, but I do like how the wall carvings, especially the randomized wall carvings, are helping tie the colors together and break up what otherwise would have been quite a flat wall. Another change that I made with regards to the secret doors was changing it so that the back wall of the antechamber is now not always a doorway and instead always a secret door, whereas the sides could be a doorway, a secret door, or still a dead end. But instead of that dead end going into a just block of unused space, it's actually concealing another room, another secret room that will have to be accessed from the outside via a secret door, the same way as the secret door that's inside here. Which I hope is going to be really interesting because it kind of encourages and demands needing to go inside to learn and understand how the structure works. And then as you realize that there might be some kind of consequence that we haven't yet developed for breaking the walls to explore the rest of it, you will have to explore outside the structure to see how to enter those other adjacent rooms, if there are any that are accessed from the outside. While we're here, we can take a look at how the secret door actually functions. So like I said, we have these ash particles here to help indicate that there is something you're supposed to do here. And the hope is that, especially if there are sconces that have generated inside of the structure, or as you unlock the recipe for them, then that'll kind of be your cue that you can place a sconce here, and that will start to trigger a new reaction. In this case, we're getting some green leaf particles, which is meant to be your indicator that you need to turn the fire green. We get green fire by placing raw copper in the sconce, and that's going to start to trigger this cool secret door animation where we get some breaking sounds, some particles around the side of the door, until eventually the entire door breaks and opens, allowing you to access the secret room, and without breaking the blocks in a way that whatever mechanic we utilize won't be able to detect or won't consider a consequence at least. It does seem like we're getting a lot of pots, so I think I'm definitely going to turn the weight of that empty pool element up even more. So we now have rooms generating in the space that we need them to, and we have a way to access those rooms when they are blocked by secret doors, serving that mechanic that we want the sconces to be used for. But we still don't actually have an incentive or a requirement to use that method rather than just breaking the blocks. The rooms we have are also pretty bare and basic. We don't have a lot of room decorations, nor do we have variants of rooms that would help kind of break up and add some more variety to every individual Badlands temple so they're not all the same. So let's head back to the flat world and start putting some of those new goals together. Before we talk about the new room variants, let's take a look at some of the decorations that'll be going inside of them. To start off with, I have two variants of statues that then also each have two variants of ruined state, whether they are a little bit damaged or completely fallen apart. They're sort of meant to represent a pretty generic man or pharaoh or a jackal here, kind of taking some inspiration from the statues outside the tomb of King Ramses II, again in Egypt. The intact and damaged variants are going to have a chance for those small decor pots or sconces, whereas the completely ruined ones are not going to have any. The statues are what are going to populate these two side jigsaw blocks in the entry hall, and as well they'll have a chance to generate from these two jigsaw blocks in the antechamber, though those will still have a chance to generate those sand piles too. For the other decorations, we first have an additional vault so that there could be a chance for the same player to get multiple kind of outputs of loot, whatever loot we end up determining is going to come from these vaults, based on the difficulty of obtaining the associated key. A chest on a little bit of a pedestal that is going to contain some pretty relevant but generic loot similar that we would find in like a desert temple or in the plains temple. This is going to have a chance to include either a sconce or some of the ingredients for it, as well as, of course, an assortment of food, metals, and in this case, a single block of TNT. The TNT serves as both a little bit of a reward and also a small red herring, because if players do light TNT inside the Badlands Temple, that's of course going to trigger the curse of the cursed coffins. This custom block is how I'm going to manage and enforce that mechanic, that idea that you should not be desecrating this tomb if you want to earn the treasure of the vault. The Cursed Coffin is a custom block that, when you place it, gets placed as a furnace so that I can know what direction it's facing and then place the coffin rotated as appropriate. This is mostly for my benefit. Of course, the player's not going to be able to obtain Cursed Coffins, so it's just so that I can place them as I'm building. This is using an item display, same as the sconce, and also has a barrier block, or rather two barrier blocks, to serve as the collision. And the idea of the cursed coffin is that if you want to get the key that is going to unlock the vault over there, you need to open the cursed coffin. But if you break blocks nearby the cursed coffin, then it's going to trigger that curse and potentially, if you're not careful, destroy the coffin, cutting you off from being able to get a key. We can demonstrate that here. If I break this block, we are going to hear a sound effect come from the cursed coffin that sounds like a wither is being damaged. If we do that again, we'll hear it again, and on the third time, that coffin is going to break permanently, and you'll never be able to get the key that you need for the vault from that particular coffin. There's going to be, ideally, several coffins within the temple, so you won't be completely cut off by making the same mistake only 3 times necessarily, unless you get really unlucky with the location of it. Each coffin is only checking about a 12 by 12, or I think maybe 24 by 24 area around it for those dropped items. And only every second. So like if you do blow up TNT, for example, all of the items that drop from them are only going to count as one trigger of the coffin's curse. So if you do end up breaking a coffin, once you realize that that's what's happening, then you can be more careful as you go and search for the other coffins, and in general, there should be more of them than there are vaults. I have 2 variants of coffin structure, one that's just on the ground and one that is a little bit raised as though it's part of a larger sarcophagus, but both of them have that dark oak wood block with the ash particles as well to indicate that you need to use a sconce to open the cursed coffin and get the key. I'll show you how that works once we get back in the test world, but first let's take a look at the new room variants where these coffins and vaults and chests are going to be generating. We have 2 rows here, one for the rooms that are going to be facing into the antechamber and one for rooms that are entered from the outside via secret door. So they're going to be identical between the 2 rows, which means we have only 3 other variants of rooms besides the generic one. This is the tomb room, where you'll see we have a bunch of flower pots both on the ground as well as on these shelves here. These are meant to kind of mimic canopic jars, but I'm going to use a processor to replace some assortment of them with air and also an assortment of them with various lit and unlit candles, just to add a little bit of mystique to the room. This jigsaw block right here is always going to generate a coffin. It'll be random which coffin it happens to be. And then we have a few more jigsaw blocks on the sides here that'll have a chance to potentially place more coffins or vaults. But I'm also taking advantage once again of bounding box manipulation to have some chances for other things in case those jigsaw blocks fail. So for example, we have this jigsaw block here that has a chance to place either a coffin or a vault. But if that fails, then this one is guaranteed to place a either treasure chest or pile of sand. And I've made it so that this jigsaw block has a higher selection priority, so it'll get attempted first. This means that we'll always have either a coffin or a vault in this location, or a chest or pile of sand, while prioritizing the coffin or vault. You could technically do this with a template pool that is specific to each of those, but depending on how your jigsaw blocks are named and how you want to place those template pools within the respective room, this is another great alternative to have even more control over the variety and placement and randomness of particular structure pieces. This next room is the vault room, which might look a little bit bare at first, but once again, this jigsaw block, like the one that could always place a coffin, is always going to place a vault. But we're doing a little bit something different with the jigsaw blocks on the side here, because we still want to discourage players breaking into this room regardless of how it's accessed. So instead of the 2 jigsaw blocks on each side, this one right here is not a chance to generate a coffin or a vault. It'll instead always generate a coffin. This is why I was saying there will be generally more coffins than vaults, and certainly enough coffins for players to learn how the mechanic works without completely locking themselves out of the main structure's interaction. There will be a coffin in every room of the structure. Now, the decoration in this room is still a little bit bare. I have included some more of the flower pots, especially around where the coffin is guaranteed to be, so that we can have a little bit of a tie-in with the tomb as far as where canopic jars are placed. But I also have some more jigsaw blocks that are here in the ceiling, and these are once again placing world gen features. Specifically, each of these has a chance to place a block column feature that will place some chains hanging down from the ceiling. This is a pretty minor, pretty subtle decorative feature, but one that I think will help make this room feel a little bit more especially tied and specific to the vault rather than the coffin like the tomb is meant to be. And then this last room variant is one that I'm calling a cache. This is going to be the most common type of room, in particular because I want to, again, have that very clear tie-in with archaeology, but it's called the cache because it has 3 guaranteed treasure chests as well, buried underneath all this sand. All of the other structure pieces in the Badlands Temple have a processor that has a small chance to place up to a maximum of 3 suspicious sand blocks, but this room in particular is going to have a higher density of suspicious sand. There will be up to a maximum of 10 of them. So this will be a great room to bring an archaeology brush into and gather some of those materials that you need to either craft a sconce or turn the sconces different colors to interact with either more secret doors or the coffins, which once again do have a chance to generate from jigsaw blocks that are underneath these sand piles. My hope with the coffins, especially with the fact that they are so forgiving and give you up to 3 chances to attempt to break them, basically, or make a mistake and accidentally break them, is that it doesn't take away too much from that general idea I mentioned at the start of this being a block game and a mining game. So you can still mine things, and in particular, you can still mine specific blocks. The cursed coffins only care if you're breaking sandstone or red sandstone blocks, but the sand, for example, if you need to dig away the sand in the cache room, does not get counted against the cursed coffins, so you can unbury them safely and be able to access them. It's just to make sure primarily that you're not breaking through the walls, breaking through the secret doors, to encourage you to interact with them as intended and see, frankly, the really cool animation that plays when you do open a secret door. And speaking of animations, the cursed coffins will also have an animation when you interact with them correctly with those sconces. But before we get to that, I think I would like to add a little bit more to the structure so that we can fully test the generation. Specifically, I would like to have that exterior decoration that will generate outside of these rooms and tie in with the hanging gardens. Since we have these statues that are so heavily based on the, at least vibes that you get from taking a look at the exterior of King Ramses II's tomb, I think I would like to replicate that idea even further and have that sort of similar, slice and rows of statues on the outside, especially around the entrance, but probably around the whole thing. I think that'll certainly make this whole thing feel very Egyptian and serve as an interesting contrast with the hanging garden vibe that we have from the roof pieces over here, which I think also need just a little bit more variety. The central piece is probably fine. I think in particular the number of jigsaw blocks and the jigsaw blocks that we have down here that are placing different varieties of wall carvings and things make this feel varied enough. But for the side pieces, I want to do something similar that I did for the Plains Temple and have some chances for these to be a little bit damaged or ruined, like we did with the statues. So I think I'll probably make 2 more variants of this side piece in particular where some of these blocks are broken as though they've fallen away or decayed in some way, whether through the test of time or through, decades, centuries of wind or being raided and attacked and destroyed. Just generally like the structure has fallen into disrepair, which I think adds a little bit of character even to a structure that has enough variety and randomness already in how it's decorated. And then once we have all that, we can see how it all comes together in the test world. There's not too much to say about these ruined roof pieces. I've got 2 variants of each kind so that, again, there's just a little bit more variety, especially with the fact that there's going to be 4 of each of these on the sides of the antechamber central roof piece, so it doesn't necessarily look quite so plainly that we're using the same piece over and over again. So we've got 2 flipped variants of a damaged side piece and 2 flipped variants of a ruined side piece that is almost completely fallen away. Now, technically, I suspect that the way that I've ruined and damaged these is probably a little bit unrealistic. These archways here, I would expect would probably be much more stable and put together, and we would instead lose much more of the roofs of the terrace here. But that would kind of betray the visual importance that these pieces are serving for the exterior. So I made it so that primarily the walls are what get torn away. The arches are what get lost and decayed by time, and we keep mostly as much of the grass as I can so that we can have those features decorating it and help adding to that appearance from above and from below. There's not really much more to say on that, so let's head over to the exterior pieces that I've built. This is the entryway piece, which you can see is not very deep at all. It's pretty much going to attach directly to that wall of the entryway that faces outside, that faces away from the antechamber, and then just add a little bit of extra shaping onto it. We've got these cool kind of, not arches, I'm not sure exactly what you would call these, but these sloped walls here that are flanking where a statue will go. And we've also got a jigsaw block in each of these little alcoves where a wall carving will get placed as well, just to add a little bit even further kind of decoration and randomness to it. We've also got one here above the entryway. The two variant pieces that'll go on the sides are very similar to that, but of course, instead of the entryway, they have just another spot where a statue will go and another wall carving piece here instead of above what would have been the entryway. The difference between these two variants is whether it serves as the actual exterior piece, a true wall that is just decorative on the outside of the structure, or whether it has a secret door into one of those rooms that doesn't connect directly to the antechamber. You can see down here, we still have the dark oak wood block that has those ash particles on it, and a jigsaw block that will place, in this case, one of the decorative wall carving pieces instead of the secret door directly, because otherwise it would be too thick. The end result for the player will be the same, but the implementation on my side needs to be slightly different so that we can work around those mechanics of jigsaw blocks and bounding boxes and such. We also have a corner piece over here, so those corners, those interior edges where the rooms are kind of at perpendicular angles with each other aren't undecorated, and they work functionally the same way, but of course don't need a variant that has a secret door because that's just not how you enter any of those particular rooms. Since these exterior walls, these alcoves, are so tall, I ended up making some additional variants of statues that are a little bit taller that wouldn't fit inside of any of the room designs of the antechamber or anything. So these ones are meant to be pretty much the same idea. We've got a pretty generic pharaoh and a cool jackal here, but they've got a little bit of extra detail by virtue of being able to be a little bit taller and having a little bit more room in general around them. I think this gives us enough to do another test generation with, so let's see how those exterior pieces work as well as the new variants of roofs and make sure that they still maintain the appearance that I want. And of course, we want to see how the cursed coffins actually operate. Oh yeah, this looks awesome. I love how it is integrating with the terrain here thanks to that bearding. Obviously, we got, again, pretty lucky here since this is in a saddle. I think at this size, it definitely would be pretty strange if it were to attempt to generate like right on top of this hill here. Unfortunately, there probably isn't a whole lot that we can really do about that. But at the very least, I feel comfortable and confident that this is probably going to be the most typical appearance of it, or close to it. The side variants for the roofs are working quite nicely. We have a completely intact one over here where we can see also a ruined variant of one of these statues that I've also added a jigsaw block for onto the top. But then if we come around the back here, we see that there's a really damaged variant as well. We do have some weird cutoffs here on the trees, and that's just because of the way the chunk borders end up lining up. We can see that it's right on the chunk borders. Unfortunately, there isn't too much we can do about that, but that is something that can happen in vanilla as well, so hopefully people will be a little bit forgiving of it. I am a big fan of how these lower exterior pieces and the statues in particular end up looking. It definitely gives off that idea that I wanted, so it looks like King Ramses II's tomb, which I think is such a cool concept. I certainly would have preferred to be able to place this structure if I knew I was going to go with this idea, with this concept for the exterior. I would have loved to be able to place it always against a hill or something, but that's just not something that jigsaw structures can actually do. We can't really detect the kind of terrain that it's placing inside of or placing near. We can only check what biome it's in. Let's start by coming around to the entrance. We can go inside through the entry hall. The entrance does connect to it as expected. And we get a couple of these statues inside as well. In this case, we got two, a ruined and a damaged variant, no intact variants, but that's okay. And let's see, I'm feeling much happier with the quantity of pots and sconces, the decor that's in this room. Now taking a look here, it looks like, yes, since we didn't really change those template pools, we are still getting these two side pieces that don't connect directly to the antechamber. We'll have to enter those through the exterior, but let's go ahead and get a pickaxe here. And I want to try breaking into this room from this side and see if we can hear, yes, we can hear that coffin. and then we've ruined the coffin. We've completely broken it. So even if you don't know exactly what's happened, it certainly doesn't sound good. We can see a very clear gap where there's no longer a coffin. A new player is not necessarily going to know that something is missing here, that something used to be here, but the sound effects will hopefully help clue in that something bad happened. We can go ahead and place down a sconce and enter this room properly. Looks like we got randomly assigned green again. But let's make sure that the coffin that's inside this room was unaffected. We can wait for that secret door animation to complete. And if we come in, yes, we actually have 2 coffins in this room, and because they were over here, only that coffin saw those blocks get broken, and so that's the one that broke, and these 2 are completely fine. We can go ahead and switch to survival so that we can trigger them, and we'll see that they have both had their face colorings turned red. This is being handled on the resource pack side the exact same way that the sconce's fire color is being handled. We can go ahead and place our sconce here and turn the fire red with some redstone dust and start to see the additional soul fire and soul particles as the coffin does its little animation to produce a scarab key. Now, just because you've solved the Cursed Coffins puzzle doesn't mean the curse has been lifted. You can still gather more scarab keys from one coffin if you so choose. It'll just change the color that you need to turn the sconce to. Which again means, as long as you're being careful, you should generally be able to get more scarab keys than you have vaults in the structure, making sure that players are able to come back to this structure in the future to get scarab keys if they want to get the vault loot for the first time. Now, of course, the puzzle of the Badlands Temple is not particularly challenging, nor is there a lot of danger associated with the structure. Although it is going to be dark enough that mobs will be able to spawn inside of here that you'll need to kill, it isn't a combat challenge. It is focused more on that puzzle solving and mechanic interpreting. So while the need to craft a sconce, which does include iron ingots, does make this technically not as early game as a desert temple or jungle temple would be to explore and to fully engage with and appreciate, it isn't necessarily a late game structure either. So the loot that you're able to get from the vault isn't necessarily super insane. We do get a dune temple trim, or chance for a dune temple trim. You can get some iron blocks, which is pretty nice, as well as iron ingots, and I even include golden dandelions in the loot here as well. There is a chance for some better loot. You can have a pretty small chance to get a single piece of diamond armor, but it won't be enchanted, and since each player can only unlock each vault one time, it means that in cases where, even if you have multiple vaults here, if you are lucky enough to get a piece of diamond armor, or even one from each of them, it shouldn't be, hopefully, too terribly game-breaking, because that's the only time you're going to be able to get that loot from here. Because ultimately, the point of creating cool structures like these is for people to play with them and for people to enjoy them. And so I want them to be enjoyable even when they are relatively simple, as I think temples ought to be. It isn't a mega dungeon, but I would say that the Badlands Temple is absolutely complete and meets my plans and expectations and hopes as we continue to expand the number of temples that can appear in the Minecraft world. Remember to like and subscribe for more custom structures, world gen, and data pack content. Check the link in the description if you're interested in learning how to make custom jigsaw structures yourself using my very thorough written guide. And to support the channel and participate in NPC fights at the end of every video like this one, please consider joining my Patreon. Congratulations to today's winner, Terion Terra, who I believe has won before. And thanks for watching!